Hello everybody, my name is Manu S and welcome to another Eternal news video. The maintenance has just ended and the patch notes have dropped, so it's time for a short review of all the changes to cards that we got with the new balance patch. Alright, so let's go over it. Also real quick an update on my new hardware. While the webcam was there super fast, my headset is running late, so still no new headset. So it probably will take a few more days with the old headset till I finally get the new one, hopefully. So yeah, I hope it arrives ASAP so we can upgrade this sound quality as well. But I hope you still bear with me with the old headset until then. Alright, let's go over the cards. First change is simply an influence change. Zindle's gift got changed from 1 shadow influence to 3 shadow influence. I think this is a pretty good change in the long run. Like right now it's not that relevant because there's not really any like top tier decks that run gift. But the thing is, it's basically the go-to card to solve like slow matchups, like control mirrors and stuff like that. And the fact that it costs 1 shadow means that a ton of like slow decks would basically splash gift simply for like other slow pseudo mirror matches versus other control decks versus other slow big mid-range decks and stuff like that. And if we have a meta game that is fairly heavy on slow control-ish, slow mid-range decks, we would suddenly have a ton of fairly stupid Zindle's gift mirrors where everybody is just racing to gift the opponent first, and that would also largely favor the player going first because they have a higher chance at gifting the opponent first. And it's a pretty unique effect, and making it super splashable because it's single influence and 7 kind of ruins the uniqueness, because even though it's a shadow card, suddenly everybody has access to it because it's so easy to splash. Like, you have to keep in mind, splashing with the influence system is even less painful and less of a cost than it is in MTG, basically, because influence requirements are not as strenuous on your power base as mana requirements are, because once you hit the influence threshold, you can play all the multiple cards in the same turn, even with those requirements and stuff, making influence requirements softer than colored mana requirements would be in Magic, for example. So yeah, this is a nice change. Triple shadow is their way of basically saying, alright, we definitely only want to see this from shadow heavy decks, since by turn 7 any shadow heavy deck that is like, say, at least 50% shadow should not have much problems of hitting triple shadow, especially if it's 2-colored. Like in a 3-colored deck, I think it makes sense to also like limit this, because 3-colored we are basically once again talking about splashing and stuff, and this is most likely meant to mostly go into 2-colored shadow plus X decks. So yeah, that is nice. That will make it, I will keep it much more unique for specific decks, namely shadow heavy decks, because it's a fairly unique shadow effect, so your deck should be dedicated shadow to have access to it, which they clearly accomplish with this change, and other than that the card is the same, so that's nice. Next we have a pretty big one, Champion of Chaos. It basically lost 2 health, which is a big blow. I honestly expected more something like Overwhelm gives +1/+0, while Deadly gives +0/+1, which I would have also found pretty flavorful, because Overwhelm is an aggressive ability and makes sense that it's tied to a +1 strength bonus, while Deadly is more of a defensive ability, which would make sense to tie it to more health. As we can also see in the game, usually deadly units have significantly lower attack than health, and making a deadly only champion a 3-4 would be very much in line with that, and a 4-4 champion would still be a really good 3-drop without being as snowbally as the old one, pressuring less hard, being easier to trade with in combat, trampling over, overwhelming for less damage through blockers, and for health max also would mean that it is easier to answer while still being not getting tempo blown out by torch. Since stuff like unenhanced Runehammer would now kill it at any point in the game, it would be easier to kill with stuff like Charchain Flail and so on. So that would have been a nice change that I would have hoped to see. This one is a bit of a blowout in my opinion, simply because having 3 health and dying to torch is a pretty big deal. Like, there's not really any playable unit in the game that costs like 3 that doesn't at least have some impact on the game or generate some value while also dying to torch. Like, if you look at stuff like Enforcer silences if it gets torched. Copperhole Bailiff shrinks opposing units before it gets torched. Amber Acolyte gets you power. Stuff like Aegis Mentor that doesn't even see much play pumps your units in hand. Dawnwalker can come back, and so on and so forth. And one of the fewer cases where that tort thing also applies is False Prince, but False Prince is always a 3 power 5/5 and always on turn 3, much easier to support than a 5/5 champion which needs triple fire and triple shadow influence, which is really hard to do on 3. So basically False Prince just gets a strong vulnerability for a strong upside, while champion basically is almost a worse False Prince now, outside of like other potential vulnerabilities, outside of the vulnerability to some other cards that False Prince has that champion hasn't. But if it comes to torch, False Prince is basically a better card than Champion of Chaos now. Sort of, since Champion also dies much easier in combat than False Prince does and blocks much worse than False Prince does. And that's the other thing that I sort of dislike. This change particularly hits mid-range in the sense that a 3 health champion is a much worse blocker than a 4 health champion. And yeah, I think since Shadow and Fire both have like serious issues in the 3-drop department already, sort of, since Assembly Line only goes in very like specialized decks, and same basically for Shadowlands Guide. Countess is like a very hit or miss type card, and that's already sort of where the options end. And Champion was like the 3-drop that made the core for like the 3-cost slot for every Stonescar deck, and I would have really liked to see a more balanced nerf, putting it down to 4/4 to just tune it down a notch and basically make it more in line with Champion of Glory, which is about 1 above the curve, while Champion of Chaos sort of was always 2 above the curve, and putting it down to 1 above the curve would have been the change that I would have preferred. This one, we'll have to see how it plays, but it is definitely one of the more gutting changes in my opinion. In general, I agree, Champion definitely needed to be changed. I just don't like that it now dies to torch and puts it in like a similar position as Gale, which doesn't see that much play, since it basically is a 3-drop that dies to torch with no tempo or value gained from it. And arguably Gale is almost better now than the new Champion of Chaos. Next we have Champion of Wisdom, just a subtle rebalance basically. The stats got shifted around a bit. Now it's a base 4/4 that becomes 6/6 rather than a base 3/3 that becomes 6/6, which is nice because now if you're heavier on the Primal, you get a 4/4 flyer, which is much better than a 3/3 flyer, especially if we are considering Torch, which is a big deal. Like if your 4-drop dies to Torch, that is like really bad, which basically made Champion a heavy time card, because it was much more important to get it to 6/6 than get it flying. Now getting it flying or getting it to 6/6 has similar benefits, since a 4/4 flyer is oftentimes even better than a 6/6 ground pounder. So that's a really nice change. Should make the card a little more attractive and a little more well-rounded in Primal and time heavy decks alike. Next we have another time-related buff. Cobalt Monument went from a 3/4 flyer to a 4/4, which I think is a fairly extreme and surprising change in my opinion. If we look at other monuments, this is now firmly tied for best monument with the time monument. Like before, I think it was like second or third, but now it's almost first. It's almost best monument, since I think like a 4/4 flying monument is better than a 5/5 overwhelm, in my opinion. The main problem with monument, I think, never was its quality. The problem was simply that there's like no unit-centered primal heavy deck that could afford to run it. But now this card is just like really good, and once there's like a primal deck that is interested in something like a monument, this monument is gonna be stellar. But right now I still don't know how relevant this change is gonna be with no deck to take advantage of it. Next we but yeah, I think it's a bit of a weird change, because this makes this monument pretty pushed. But okay, we'll see how it will work out in the future once it might see some play somehow. Next we have Crownwatch Paladin. Got changed from a 2/2 to a 2/1, which is another pretty big change, since now it attacks and blocks a lot worse. Can be cleaned by Varus Favor once the Aegis has been gotten rid of. Just not that big of a deal, since usually Varus Favor is what gets rid of the Aegis, so that's not that relevant. But now it trades with Grenadians, which is a really big deal. Like trading with half a Grenadian drone is pretty gutting, and it also trades with stuff like Initiative of the Sands, and yeah, just kind of lines up very poorly with a lot of stuff. It already didn't line up too great before, and basically had to bank on its Aegis plus help from attachments and combat tricks to take on other units in combat. But now as like a 2/1, it's even harder. So I think this is like a pretty big blow to Raikano, and while it wasn't in the greatest position lately anymore anyway, this should put it even further down the tier list or playability or whatever. Since yeah, this card now is pretty mediocre, I would say. Since without any like weapon on it or anything, it basically is quickly in the same situation as Oni Ronin often is. Next we have Explorer Emeritus, another slight buff. It got changed from a 0/1 to a 0/2, which I think is a nice change, since having your 5-drop die to the omnipresent Varus Favor is a bit absurd. I mean, the card hasn't seen any play and probably won't see play in the near future either, but in general it's still a nice and sound change to not get blown out by a favor as a 5-drop, since that made the card like even more unappealing and unplayable. And now if there's a deck that might be interested in this type of card, this type of effect, can reasonably justify considering it now that it doesn't die to Vara's favor anymore. Next big change is Frontier Jeto. While Jeto was never like too dominant or like broken, the deck has always been really good, and I have been a big proponent of claiming that it, in my opinion, for the majority of the time, has been one of the best decks and strongest decks in the game, and was definitely undervalued. And the recent rise of Volcano Jeto as an alternative brought some more attention to Jeto in general, and I think this change is partially directed towards the future, simply because while Jeto is already pretty good with one set, imagine what happens if we get more sets with more playable 1-drops that they definitely would want to print. Then we quickly get into a spot where Jeto aggro is just super busted and completely blows out people. And while Jeto is not the best card in the deck, probably, it is the card that generates the biggest blowouts and the most explosive draws, so it makes sense hitting it so that people can either like drop it entirely or play some of them for like some explosiveness in the mid game, rather than on turn 2 putting the opponent so far behind that a lot of decks can simply not recover in any way. So yeah, this change most likely kind of kills the card, but is probably necessary going forward, allowing Direwolf enough design space for constructed viable 1-drops in set 2, for example. Next we have another Primal buff. Joral Iceheart got changed from a 6/6 to a 6/7. I don't think that will make him see any play compared to now, but it is definitely a general trend in beefing up Primal and raising the overall power level of Primal cards for limited and constructed. Not sure why exactly this card got changed in the way it got changed, to be honest, since I can't think of anything where it lines up particularly bad. Like, the only thing that I can think of is now it doesn't die to Obliterate anymore, which is a 5 power card, so that might be one of the things, since it's a bit annoying if your 6-drop dies to a 5-cost burn spell, so that might be part of it. And it also survives Stonescar Maul, making it generally basically requiring hard removal to kill, since even the high-end soft removal doesn't get there anymore. Next one is a pretty big one, especially for limited. Scaly Ruin now costs 2 instead of 3, without any other changes. That is pretty huge. Like, that makes it suddenly from a pretty bad filler in like reactive evasion decks in draft, for example, to a premium 2-drop. Like, Scaly Ruin is like gonna be the star 2-drop of your Primal draft decks now, I think. And even in constructed, this might be an interesting 2-drop and at least like an interesting sideboard card, blocking even stuff like Instigator. Next we have another cost change. Soulfire Drake costs now triple fire rather than double, basically more firmly cementing it in fire heavy decks and destabilizing the 5-drop slot in Stone Scar decks a bit more, since while the deck usually has 3 of one of the 2 influences on 5 all the time, it doesn't always have both. So if you have a draw where you have like 3 or 4 shadow influence by turn 5 and only 2 fire, you might not be able to play a 5-drop on curve. So this definitely reduces the consistency of the archetype, especially if you play Soulfire Drake and Reaper. And yeah, also makes it more costly in other 2-color decks basically, and also very firmly puts it out of reach of anything that is more than 2 colors basically. Next change is another small buff, Spire Tripplane. I think this is also mostly a limited change, I would say. Got changed from a 3-2 to a 3-3. I don't think that will make it see any play in Constructed, since the card is just not something you usually want in Constructed decks. Maybe someone comes up with something eventually, but so far there's nothing, and I can't think of anything that I would want to do with him. But being a 3-3 definitely makes it a much more reasonable pickup for limited decks, since a 3-3 for 3 is already solid, and a 3-3 for 3 that gets you some value quickly becomes a solid draft pickup, especially in decks that can make enough use out of the extra sigils you gain. And yeah, especially for example Combrade draft decks are pretty good at that. They have various empower things and a bunch of ultimates at 8 they want to ramp to, so this became a lot better early pick and draft, I think. Next change is Staff of Stories. It got changed from 5 armor to 4 armor. I assume that's just basically because it's the go-to card draw engine in the game, and I guess they felt it was a little too easy to defend, and now it's a bit easier to get rid of, like a Torch plus a Varus Favor kills it now. Auric Runehammer kills it now. Stuff like that. It's just a bit easier to get rid of, because I can remember there were like plenty of occasions where I was like 1 damage short of getting the staff off, and then the opponent got another free draw and stuff. So, and staff can run away with the game pretty quickly, so getting rid of it a turn earlier than usual can make a huge difference. Not sure what the exact reasoning for that is, like why they felt it is needed, because it likely won't be due to like ranked results, because staff decks are not particularly prominent nor particularly dominant or successful in the last couple of weeks, so I would be curious what the exact reasoning for that change is. If anyone has any ideas or suggestions, feel free to post them in the comments, regarding other cards as well, obviously. Next is another influence change. Steward of the Past got changed from single shadow to double shadow, which I very much agree with. The card is once again another pretty unique shadow effect, and this change puts it in line with Sandstorm Titan, for example, which is a comparable card which also costs double time, and also makes it very much not splashable. Like before we saw armory decks that splashed like 2 Steward's main deck, for example. Now they can't, basically, because they only splash shadow and they cannot play a double shadow 4-drop, which is very reasonable. Now they have to stick to something like Statuary Maiden, which is which works in a very different way and doesn't allow you to have like these 1 or 2 silver bullets. Yeah, these 1 or 2 silver bullet stewards that it could fetch with Rise and just retrospectively silence the entire enemy void and deny them everything they might have put in there. and a lot of people were quite frustrated with how oppressive, especially Steward, was towards void-centered stuff. So this will reduce the amount that we see Steward and also make it, a little less inconsistent on 2, while a 2-faction deck should usually still be able to play it on for almost all of the time. It might not always compared to now. And yeah, I think it's a nice change. Puts a strong but unique card more firmly into its faction and makes it therefore also a bit more unique. Same change basically here with Subvert, changing from 1 shadow to double shadow. Also basically just as a way to cement it as a unique shadow effect that you should be doing more than dipping into shadow to have access to, basically, is their statement here, I think. Next change is a pretty interesting one. Thunderstrike Dragon now is a 5/6 rather than a 5/5, which is pretty interesting. I mean, the card, in my opinion, was already kind of appealing before. The problem is a bit that it's a single faction card that dies to cheap removal, which can generate pretty big tempo swings. But getting 2 big flyers from 1 card is a lot of value, even though it comes at some tempo cost. And yeah, making it a 5/6 makes it even stronger, like it now holds off a Sandstorm Titan rather than basically looking at it stupid and not being able to fly over it, which definitely makes it a bit more viable there. And once we see like Primal based decks that can make proper use of this type of card, it will definitely be much more interesting and playable now. And I guess it just got even more dominant in draft. It's already like a crazy bomb, and now it's even better. Next change is Tundra Explorer. It basically changed from a 2/2 for 2 to a 3/3 for 3, putting it more in line with Spire chip lane, like basically a similar Primal card to Justice Spire chip lane. And also makes it a bit better at doing its job, since as a 3/3 for 3 it can attack a bit more and easier than as a 2/2 on a lot of boards, which makes it more likely to gain value from its ability than before. Next we have another influence change. Umber Reaper basically got the same treatment as Soulfire Drake, and that also means decks that run both get a lot more inconsistency in their 5-drops, basically making shaking up the consistency of these Stone Scar curves a bit here, I guess, since it's not a card that anybody splashed before or were thinking about splashing. It's just basically a way to make them harder to support, since double influence on 5 is fairly easy, and it rarely happens that you don't have 2 of each influence on 5 in a 2 faction deck, thanks to how good the fixing is in the game and stuff, especially Shadow with Varus favor. But 3 on 5 is a different story. That's something that you miss out on much more often, and therefore it will happen a bunch more now that you have this 5-drop in hand and not enough influence to support them. And especially having stuff like Obliterate, Drake and Reaper in the same deck will be, and Flame Blast will be now much more taxing, and you might have to either lean on towards triple fire cards or triple shadow cards rather than play like Reaper, Flame Blast and Drake in the same deck without much sacrifice. Now you will lose a lot of consistency putting all these cards in the deck. You can hardly play Flame Blast Drake and Umbran Reaper in the same deck. So maybe we see a shift more towards Drake, Obliterate, Flame Blast in burn heavy decks, and they will just drop Reaper, for example. Which is nice because the deck maybe just kind of had it all and a bit too much of everything, and now it has to make clearer decisions on what it wants and at what cost, basically. Next change is another subtle Primal buff. Basically, Windshaper went down to 4 power and only lost 1 health to compensate for that, making it a much more attractive and stabilizing drop, especially in limited for evasion decks, since at 5 the 2/5 stats were a bit meh, and it didn't even like block that well against a lot of other 5 drops. Now as a 2/4 for 4 it blocks pretty well against a lot of stuff, and you get the like ground stabilization and the air bonus much quicker to raise harder. So yeah, Primal got a ton better in limited now, which I'm curious how it's gonna play out, because I think Elysian was already really good, one of the best archetypes, and all these changes make the Elysian deck much better now, and it already was good. Not sure how these changes affect Feln, because a lot of these cards are more seen in Elysian draft decks, I would say, and are better in Elysian draft decks, since the Feln decks usually do little different things with like infiltrate and often being a bit more aggressive, and these like evasion flyer type things are particularly an Elysian thing, while they also go in Feln. So we'll have to see how it plays out, but they are definitely taking steps to address the fact that Primal is by far the weakest faction in the game right now in a vacuum, like independent of format. Just if you look at cards, card quality and stuff, Primal is definitely, or was definitely, lacking relative to other factions. And last but not least, Withering Ridge got changed from a 1/4 to a 1/1, which is an interesting change. Like, the card was not particularly dominant. They just kind of basically felt the card is a bit too strong and has too many like complicated interactions than they would like to have for these like higher tier decks, basically. And I think Scarlet said somewhere that they felt she's a bit too good at locking up her board on her own by basically just setting everything to 1 and then having that 1/4 blocker that can hold off multiple units that have less than 4 attack, and even like trade with the one big guy that can attack, and then like the next turn potentially punish you with wiping the rest and even keeping Withering Witch alive through Lightning Storm and stuff. Now at least if you storm, your witch dies with the storm, and witch only trades with like the best unit that it put to 1 health, and the rest can just like freely attack. Before, like if you attack with multiple units, they could choose to like block your second best unit that doesn't trade with witch, take damage from your best unit, but basically freely eat your second best unit or whatever. Now they can only trade with 1 unit, so they will usually have to trade with the best unit either way, and the rest can still attack with impunity. So that will definitely make the card less stabilizing and dominating. Curious how it's gonna play out, because I think now it's a bit weak as like a turn 5 play and basically only appealing as like a combo play with Lightning Storm on turn 7. But if you like play this on a board with a couple units on turn 5, that seems like kind of a wonky and risky play, especially given that the opponent can maybe like kill the 1/1 easily with like a small relic weapon like Sword of Icaria, or just kill it with Varus Favor and stuff. So you're kind of almost skipping your 5th turn now in order to set all your opponent's units health to 1, making it arguably worse in terms of tempo than something like Stray into Shadow would be. And I can very much see that how a card like Stray into Shadow might be an interesting alternative and legitimate competition for Withering Witch now, depending on what problems you're dealing with. Alright, that's my overview of the changes and my opinion and possible explanation or reasoning behind them that I see, and what effect that will have on the cards and potentially also the decks they went into or are in. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about the changes. If you have any ideas or explanations for some of the changes that I missed or that differ from mine, or where you disagree with me, or if you have any further questions. That's it for this time again. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.